Captain Midnight.
With X-Men Dark Phoenix getting pushed back even farther on the release schedule, the once massive X-Men franchise kind of feels like an afterthought in the current movie landscape. And that's a shame, because despite giving us some great movies, I don't think the X-Men, as they exist on the comics page, has ever quite been represented right on the big screen. Now with it looking likely that the mutants will be making their way to the MCU eventually, I wanted to talk about what I'd like to see, and specifically how to do the team justice while fitting them into the rest of the MCU in a way that makes sense. And for me, the best way forward may be looking to the past.
Marvel Comics X-Men, today's most popular superheroes.
Saturday morning's hottest TV show.
And America's favorite comic book.
Now, of course, the X-Men have been around since the 60s, but most fans will agree that the series didn't really become the X-Men we know today until Chris Claremont's incredible run that began in 1975, and, in some form or another, lasted all the way until the early 90s. Lee and Kirby may have built the House of X, but it was Claremont and artists like Dave Cockrum that turned it into an empire. Many fan-favorite elements of X-Men, from Nightcrawler to Wolverine's character development to Magneto's tragic World War II era backstory, were born from this era. And when you go back and read those late 70s, early 80s comics, even when they're dated in some places, it becomes very clear what they have that the Fox X-Men never did: a deep bench of characters. Where the Fox movies focused almost all their attention on Wolverine, Professor X, and Magneto, and one or two others, Claremont's X-Men had a deep interest in all of them, producing one iconic moment after the next. This embrace of the whole team, instead of just one or two breakout characters, is something that I think the MCU X-Men absolutely has to get right if it's going to set itself apart from the Fox movies. And speaking of the MCU, right now all their plans for the X-Men, and even the Fox Disney deal itself, is up in the air, but for the sake of some fun speculation, let's talk about how we might work them into current continuity.
Hey kid, think you're an X-Man? This is the place to prove it.
X-Men headquarters!
I've seen a lot of fun theories for how the MCU, which of course hasn't really mentioned mutants at all so far, could work them into the narrative. One popular theory goes that it could be revealed that Professor X was using his powers to erase all memories of mutants this whole time. Now this is just one of hundreds of fan ideas, and a lot of them are really imaginative, but for me, a lot of these ideas share one common problem. They require a lot of explanation and rewriting of past MCU films, and I think that's kind of an unfair thing to put on the very first Marvel Studio X-Men film. This is going to be a fresh start after all, and I think it would be best if things didn't get bogged down in complicated explanations, which require even more exposition, which, let's face it, superhero movies already have enough of. Instead, I'd like to go really simple. In the MCU, mutants could just be a pretty new phenomenon. Sure, there could be older ones like Xavier and Wolverine who managed to go under the radar, but now the mutant population is really booming, and S.H.I.E.L.D., who worked to keep them out of the public eye, just isn't able to do it anymore, leading to the public finding out about mutants all at once and sparking a massive panic. After young mutants begin to be attacked in school and on the streets, Professor X quickly puts together a new school, the Xavier Institute for Mutant Education and Outreach. Now I admit this is a very basic setup, and it could be accused of being too much like X-Men First Class. And, you know, maybe it would be. But I think what the MCU could do is what Marvel Studios has usually excelled at when introducing new heroes: focusing on personality and character. The last X-Men film, Apocalypse, tried to do something like what I'm describing, taking the young versions of classic X-Men like Cyclops and Jean Grey and giving them the spotlight. But a lot of stuff, like some really charming scenes of the team bonding while hanging out at the mall, were completely cut in favor of more Apocalypse and an unnecessary Wolverine cameo. By focusing on the team itself and their growing pains, instead of just Professor X, Magneto, and Wolverine, the movie could really set itself apart. A little less of this, and a little more of this.
Magneto has arrived, only in X-Men 2 for Sega Genesis. Now 2 can play the most mutant hero.
But of course, that's just the beginning. I'd really like to add an element of the Harry Potter films to the X-Men, and by that I mean watching the characters grow up film by film, and really making sure Xavier's school feels like a school, not just the place the X-Men's Blackbird happens to leave from. Okay, this next suggestion might not be too popular, but I really don't think the first and maybe even the second film should even feature Wolverine. Instead, giving the spotlight to the rest of the team. And I get it, Wolverine is cool, he's iconic, and he's easily the most famous member of the team, but at this point he also comes with a lot of baggage. After Logan, I think old Weapon X deserves a much needed break, and any actor they try to cast is going to be under intense scrutiny, having to measure up to Hugh Jackman's now revered performance. Instead, they should just focus on giving us a great X-Men movie, so by the time the films reintroduce Logan, the franchise will have a lot more goodwill. But okay, reaching even farther, what should this future Wolverine be like? For me, I'd really like to see a much less polished Wolverine. Hugh Jackman is a really tall, good-looking guy, and he was a good fit for Wolverine the leading man. But for Wolverine the supporting character, I'd love to see a return to the stouter, gruffer, and yes, hairier Logan that's always been my favorite version of the character. But back to the main team. Sorry, I couldn't resist going off on a little Wolverine tangent for a second. I've picked a few characters I'd like to see who I don't think they got quite right last time around. Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey, Colossus, Kitty Pryde, and finally Nightcrawler, with Kitty and Kurt being kind of the younger two of the group. And I think a big question mark for the MCU X-Men movie will be if they can manage to create an interesting Cyclops. Scott Summers gets a lot of hate, and I get that. A lot of the time he's just used as the lame square that has to play the fussy teacher's pet to Wolverine's quips. But going back and rereading the old Claremont stuff recently, I was really struck by just how interesting he is. Cyclops isn't your square-jawed generic superhero type. Well, not when he's well written. There's a lot of insecurity and barely concealed rage just under the surface, and he's trying to contain it all in the name of being a good leader. Honestly, a young Timothy Olyphant, who you may know from Justified and Deadwood or the bad guy from Die Hard 4, would have been perfect, because an actor like him I think is what it would take to bring out the interesting side of the character. Storm and Colossus could have also been done so much better by really highlighting what makes them unique, which should be easy considering their fairly crazy backstories. Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler, well, they just rule and I want them in my X-Men movie. So yeah, those are a few of my thoughts on the possible MCU X-Men movie, but this is one where I'd definitely like to hear from you guys too. Who would be in your dream X lineup, and how would you introduce them? Oh, and just so you know, I plan on uploading a Patreon exclusive focusing on the bizarre Hulk movie from 2003 sometime this weekend. These are full Captain Midnight videos, just like the ones I upload here every week. So if you're interested, be sure to sign up and get one extra video every month at patreon.com/Captain Midnight. You can get the link in the description in the pinned comment. But otherwise, I'll see you next week.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes.